Quadsat, and we're going to demo today our payload. It is a sensor for a drone. You can already see now here on the screen that we clearly illustrate a drone, but it's actually what's underneath the drone that we do. We are drone agnostic, so we put it on different kinds of drones. Today we're going to demonstrate one drone, but we have it on different ones depending on which operational environment we're in. Today I'm going to go over the evolution of ELIN payloads and how that fits into the whole picture of smaller unmanned aerial systems, so drones, and how that whole area has evolved. If we look a bit historically, then in the 70s, then they started to have manned aviation that used some of these. They were not sophisticated, these sensors, but they had different kind of radio equipment on the planes, and then they had a few number of these, and then they used these to investigate what was in the airspace, also what was on the ground, and simply gather intelligence. In the 90s, this changed. We saw more and more autonomy. It was still the same kind of like fixed wing aircrafts, so still fairly big. They were just suddenly unmanned. And this meant that there was less need for people, more autonomy, and thereby you could also have more numbers. It's still very, very expensive aircrafts, and that also means that you have a limited amount of these aircrafts. Then, as almost everyone knows, then all of this changed in the 2000s. Drones started to get more and more foothold. The technology evolved very quickly. It became more and more autonomous, but also it was in a size that's smaller than what it was before. And our payload, it is designed to be put on these smaller drones. By smaller, we say that it is group 2 and 3 drones, often below 25 kilos, down to the drone we are flying with today, that is 12 kilos. But essentially what this does is that you can have more systems, they can be more distributed, you can have them in different locations, and if something happens to one of these drones, yes, it is not the best day for the team, but still they are distributed and there are so many of them that it's not a major impact on what you try to achieve. And if we then look a bit more into how this looks in terms of drones and how the whole drone sector evolved, then if we look back, then yes, there was a bunch of different components that you could fit together yourself. You could buy them on various different shops. You could fit these together, and if you were really lucky and you spent some time on it, you could get things to fly. That slowly evolved into some of these well-known Chinese brands where they produce a lot of drones. They are extremely standardized. They use all of the same components, they use the same communication links, and they were used initially for different efforts, including war, where they retrofitted them with different kind of payloads and so on, but they all had the main drawback that was simply because of how standardized they were. That if you had one vulnerability on one of them, it will work on all of them. And that means that they're still used today, but they're used for a very small subset of the operations. Whereas then everything evolved into local production and also smaller production units. And that means that they can take direct input from what happens in the field and then adapt their platform to what it actually is that they need to be used for and how the technology moves. And then you might ask, how does that relate to what you're doing? But again, it's about being a smaller company that gets all of the feedback, and then we can adapt the solutions based on how everything evolves. And still having a fairly versatile solution, such that we can push out things when we develop new solutions, such that they are still up to the state of art. And if we look at how this actually works, then on the right hand side, you see a picture. You have to be very specialized to know what it is that we're showing here, but this is actually a radar locator that is taken from a Shahed drone. So a Shahed drone is not that new, but this is one of the solutions that were implemented or introduced in order to find radars. So that is a system or payload that you put inside on a Shahed, and then you can actually use it to target big radar systems. We do it in a kind of different way, but we do something that's very similar to this. So we started in SATCOM, and then we moved into this whole ELIN area, where we produce ELIN payloads. So what we essentially have is a sensor, a payload that goes underneath a drone. It is fully motorized, so it's a gimbal setup, and then we have an RF emitter or detector in this gimbal that we can point in different directions, and also fully stabilized and fully independent of the vehicle or the drone that we're mounted on. And how it actually looks, we have a bit of a drawing here on the right hand side, and again you see another kind of drone. This is the Portuguese Take Ever drone. Take Ever, you will see them in the tent. They're also a sponsor of this event, but it is one of the platforms that we have integrated on. But you see the size of the, well, you cannot see the size, but you can get an idea of how big it is here on the right hand side. It is the same system that we integrate on different kind of drones. It's just built in a tiny different way in terms of how it's mechanically put into the drone. And it is fairly small. We operate at a weight class of about approximately 3 kilos, and it takes around 30 watts to power it. So we can equip it on both electric but also petrol-powered vehicles. We equip it on multi-rotors, as we will see today, but also fixed-wing aircrafts or fixed-wing drones. And that is simply because of where these are used and which operational complexity that's in them. And on the lower part of the slide, you can see these different zones. These zones are relevant to what it is that you want to detect. The higher up our payload goes, the more we can see. The more we can see, that means that the Earth is curved, and the higher we go, of course, we can see further into the distance. So there are different operational capacities in each solution. Today we're going to fly this drone up to roughly like 300 meters, and then we can see quite a distance, like 50, 60 plus kilometers out. But of course, if you put it on a fixed wing, that's more efficient, that can fly longer, you can go higher, and you can also fly a longer distance and thereby gather more data. The way that this works, we have a few more numbers up here that you can see the size of how it is, but we detect a target over a distance and then we simply triangulate it. There's a lot more that goes into the way that we triangulate and also the way that we detect signals, because we detect signals within 2 to 18 gigahertz. So it's quite a large band, but it also means that we cover most of the radars that you already find out in the field, and also even jammers and other kinds of solutions. But in essence, the trigonometry here is that we get a line of bearing from one location, and then we get line of bearings from other locations as well. We combine this into getting an estimate of where a target would be on the ground, and that's also what we will see later. You might ask, okay, how does this differ compared to other EW payloads or any other ELINT payload that's out there? It is both the way that we like our software and how we compute stuff, but actually also how it's mechanically designed. So instead of normally you would use some kind of like spherical antenna, we have a horn-mounted horn antenna on this drone, and that means that we have a very directional antenna solution on it. We have a few plots for the ones that are really technically interested, but otherwise come and ask me later, I'll go through these plots in detail. But essentially it means that we have a 2 to 4 times higher signal that's coming into our payload compared to these traditional solutions. And that is directly convertible into range and distance that we can detect these systems at. And for the real tech people, here's also a bit of how the theory behind this looks, what the kind of accuracy with a system like this we should be able to achieve, both when we put it on a drone, but also what we actually do in experimental or in practice. So we should get somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 degrees of accuracy, or like RMS error, if we look at the theory. And initially when we started with this a few years ago, as everything starts, we were not that accurate. We were around 10 degrees, but now after fine-tuning everything and also adapting the algorithms and so on we have running in behind, we actually achieved this this theoretical assumption of how precise we should be, and we actually get all the way down to 1.5 degrees in the best cases. And we can see all of this in just a moment. So I'll let Milan take off the drone. We have it out there. Right now it's mounted on an SpectraLoc. Again, it is a drone that we use quite a lot. It is, it's electrically powered, and we have this every day. And just so you all know, please don't switch the slides yet. I still have a few. Perfect. This is not going to be the most interesting flight, if you hoped for that. Some of the other ones, they were a lot more interesting than this. We're essentially today just going to go up and fly to one point, and then we're going to start getting data from that. We're going to go to roughly the east, like 250, 300 meters, but that is purely to get a line of sight into what is in the distance. There are radars here at the airport. Tama has some radars behind there, but it's not that good of a demo, just tracking what we can already see. So we're going to track something that's further away, where we can actually, detect it without being able to see it. Today we are flying with a quadcopter, but I also said that we can fly with a fixed wing. It's two different operational scenarios. This is an electric quadcopter. That means that it has a reduced flight time compared to like 20 plus hours on a fixed wing. But in that case, we then fly the drone for, let's say, 10 minutes at a time. We fly it to around 500 meters. In this case, not that high, but we could fly it that high. We can even fly it a bit higher. But that means at that kind of altitude, we can detect around 80 kilometers into the distance. We then need to fly them from roughly 2 or more locations in order to get an estimate of where something is on the ground. And that's simply because we need an accurate range to the target that we are flying on. Whereas if you go into the fixed wing case, they can fly for a longer time, which also means that we can, because of efficiency and so on, we can get them to a higher altitude, and we can see further into the distance with them. And 200 kilometers is what we put here on the slide, but everything really depends on how high they fly. And they fly for longer, and then they fly for a longer distance, which is then corrected based on what you're tracking on. We're not limited to tracking on one source at a time. We can simply have as many we want ongoing at a time, and then the payload automatically handles all of this. Our tracking and searching, it works in 3 phases. So if you know a signal, then you can actually skip the first one. But let's say that you didn't, or you don't know what it is that you're looking for, you can then start exploring. Is there any kind of footprint, anything that I know is out there? It could also be that you know the frequencies, that you have a list of frequencies that you want to detect. All of these can go into the payload, and it can automatically let the operator know that now there is something that you need to be looking at. The next phase is investigate, or where you actually try to get more information about that signal. And lastly, when you have information about this, you start locating the source. All of this you will see in practice in just one moment. So I know we have a video running on the right-hand side, but let's actually go to the demo. So here we have one of our interfaces. It should be said that we have multiple interfaces. This is what is running locally on the machine right now. We don't really have that much requirements for the machine that we're running on. Linux, Windows, whatever you have already, it works. But generally on the right-hand side, of course, you can all see that we have a map. And on the left-hand side, we have different like signals we have already said that it's interesting to look in this area. We have different ones, and we're going to look at some of these today. It should be noted that this interface, there's not a lot of buttons on it, but it's designed for this operator that has limited EW knowledge, but can still, is still able to operate a system like this. So Milan, if you will click at one of them. So for example, this one is, you can already see some orange lines on the map, but if you know where we are today, and you can also see the drone on the map, they're actually coming from another side. This is some measurements that we already did previously on the eastern part of Funen. Since we are flying with a multi-rotor today, we need data from different locations. It can both be from the same sensor that you move, but it can also be from different drones that you have in different units all around. But yeah, you see here that we have already some directions towards something that comes from the north, and then we want to continue on this data set that we have. So what Mila did now is to say, okay, it is in the neighborhood of what is already detected. We don't have to search 360 degrees around. We can do that, so we can just look everywhere for a signal. But now we're just starting the first phase here, looking at, okay, where is the signal coming from where we are flying now? It could also be that the signal moved. All of these things is inherent in the software. So we have to just give it a bit of time. Again, I said that it is very non-interesting to look at our drone. It is up there, you can probably hear it. You cannot even see it from here, what's moving on it, but the whole payload is working behind the scenes. And we now got a sort of an initial location towards the target, and now based on this location, then we will start to locate the target. And yes, we know somewhere where this target will be, because we have like a one-dimensional line on the map where we can see where it is. But then we want to have these lines of bearings they have to intersect in order for us to find the area where the target is most likely to be at. So we have to just give it a bit of time. But worth noting here is how many times you see Milan's mouse moving, because you've seen him click twice now. And that's essentially what is really needed if you roughly know what kind of signals that you're looking at. And I don't know, Milan, if you want to zoom in a bit in, just so we can see a bit more. So we got the first line of bearing here, and it intersects with the other lines of bearings that we have. And then as soon as we get more and more of these lines of bearings in, we will then start to get closer and closer towards an estimate of the position. This estimate of the position, you will see that as an ellipse on the map. You should see this sort of as a heat map. It's a 95% confidence interval ellipse, which means that in some cases we also, it is a bit bigger than you might think, but it's still in the range of a few kilometers. And then in an operational context, then you would combine a system like this with, for example, an EO sensor in order to verify exactly where it is. Or it could also be that you just want to gather this data over time to see where these things move to. Milan is currently zooming in, and just looking at map data, then we can actually see that there is a radar right there. For the ones that know a bit more about EW, you might say, yeah, but how can we detect, or how can we verify this as a radar? Of course, we can get everything in terms of how the spectrum looks and so on. We just don't need to look at it in theory, because it takes a bit more knowledge to see how a radar is in this kind of view. But we can see on the top we have a typical spectrum, similar to what most people know from audio. We also have an RF spectrum, so it's different electromagnetic signals that are coming or detected by the payload. And then we see these at an instance at the top, and then we see more of a time evolution at the bottom. It's what we call, or what is called, a waterfall. So you simply have to see this as a waterfall going down, but then it's a momentary input that comes to the top, and then it's flowing down. And that means that we can see how a signal is pulsing, how it's behaving, how it's changing frequency, if it's chirping, how it actually looks in the real world. But again, this is more for if you want to simply just wander around in the spectrum, see if there's anything new in there. And at the same time, you see that the payload is still just working in the background. We can show different radars that we can detect from just this location that we are at. So the keener you that might know all of these maritime radars that we have in Denmark, especially Tama and probably also Defense. Maybe you know these locations. Not to go too much into where they're located, but you can see one of them when you drive over the Great Belt Bridge, and there is also one on Langeland. Not to give away the specific locations, but this is all things we detect with only having a drone in here, and then from a few other strategic locations without ever having a clear view of it. So purely what we have in there. I think we can switch back to my slide. And Mila will just take the drone now down and land it. But everything is essentially automated in the end. We have some different interfaces because, of course, if we have data coming in from multiple sources, we want to combine these. And we therefore also have a system that is capable of doing this. So let's say we had 3 systems that were flying here over Funen. And then we want, I don't know how the colors is on this, hopefully you can see that there are some colors coming out of these drones. But then we have 3 drones that are working in unison on the same source. And thereby we can see again here one of these radars, the one on Spoye in this case, how the data is gathered and how quick in reality this data can be computed in order to give a location estimate just from having 3 drones in the air at the same time. And of course you can do this with 2 drones as well. This is just for illustration of how it would be. In the end, you'll get something like this after a few minutes, and you have a fairly decent location of where it is. You can also have the other case. Here we just illustrated 2 fixed-wing drones flying. You see that they're gathering data over a longer distance. You could get enough data to locate a source based on just one flying, but here again you have 2 systems that are feeding data into the same backend. And if we then go a bit beyond everything, let's say that we had, not to go into the specifics about where we have systems, but in a location. Here, we just illustrate it as being Ukraine. Having multiple systems, we can track not only one source, but we can track multiple sources from multiple sensors at a time. And then we will get a picture like this in the end. So some of these could be multi-rotor drones that are just up once in a while, or we can also have some vehicles that are traveling for a longer time. And that's actually what I wanted to say today. We integrate with different like C2, C3 backend systems, like Schönhofer, like the different ones, but it's really dependent on where we deploy our solution. Again, we are a sensor technology company, so we just provide a data output at the end. Thank you all for listening.